So welcome to the latest Google Hangout then. I decided to do a new mock draft today because the free agency, certainly the first wave has gone. You could probably argue that the second and the third wave has gone as well. And while there are still some big names like Ndamukong Suh and a number of safeties that are still unsigned, pretty much free agencies in the rear wing window at the moment. And, we're moving on to look at the draft now. We've had these big pro days this week. You've got the owners meeting next week. There are still trades being done in the NFL. Jared Valdir went from Arizona to Denver today for a sixth-round pick. So there are still going to be some moves. There's still going to be some free agent signings. The Seahawks adding another signing today at defensive tackle. But ultimately, teams are going to start focusing on the draft now. So I wanted to do a mock draft with sort of the free agency period and the combine in mind and put that out today. If you haven't seen it, then it's already on the blog there. You can check it out. It's a two-round mock draft. Wanted to start with a few thoughts here, then moving on to the Seahawks and talking about a few topics and then doing a Q&A at the end. So a few extra thoughts, first of all, on the top of the first round in this new mock draft. At number one, increasingly the suggestion and the talk in the media is that it's going to be USC Sam Darnold to go as first overall to Cleveland. I'll probably stress that you can't read too much into that. We heard all sorts the last 2 years at this time of year with certain players are in contention at number one and such. There have been suggestions from respected analysts like Tony Pauline as well, for example, projecting Saquon Barkley at number one and saying that Cleveland's going to take the best player, just as they did last year with Myles Garrett, and that they're not entirely enamored with this quarterback class. And you've also got to keep Josh Allen in mind as well as a contender to go number one overall, given his physical skills and the potential he's got there. And now that Cleveland has got a legit placeholder in Tyrod Taylor as well, I mean, they could consider a number of different options there at quarterback. They don't necessarily have to take the guy who could help them win in 2018. He could be the guy that they think has got the most upside potential down the road. But at the moment, Sam Darnold seems to be the favorite to go number one. So I'm putting him at number one, and that leaves the Giants at number two with a big decision to make. Do they like Josh Rosen enough to take him at number two, or Josh Allen, or Baker Mayfield? Are they going to be thinking long-term replacement for Eli Manning with that pick, thinking that this is a rare opportunity for them to be at number two and they need to take advantage of that by getting a quarterback for the future? And that's debatable because while it makes sense for the Giants to think about life after Eli Manning, it doesn't make sense for them to pick a quarterback that they don't 100% believe in. And there are question marks about Josh Allen for sure and his accuracy and the way that he performed in college. There are concerns about Josh Rosen's personality. Baker Mayfield's a bit of a wild card. He's not exactly the prototype at quarterback in terms of size and physicality, although he's a very skilled passer of a football. So you don't see a clear direction there for New York if they have any doubts about those quarterbacks. And you don't see a quarterback that, if you're Dave Gettleman, that you want to tie yourself to, that you want your time at New York to be defined by you picked that quarterback at number two, then you have some other options. And, this is a team that does have Eli Manning, that does have Odell Beckham, that does have Evan Ingram, that has now got Nate Solder in there at left tackle, that has got a few defensive players as well that they've either drafted or signed over the years. You go and get Saquon Barkley at number two, and you have got one of the most potent offenses that is out there. And if you go and, whether you trade up and get someone like Will Hernandez at the top of the first round, or maybe if he falls to the second round, you could still go and get an Isaiah Wynn or an Austin Corbett or somebody like that with interior offensive line options that are going to be there in the late first and the early second round for New York. If you get a Barkley, you get a guard to put next to Nate Solder, you've got Ingram, you've got Odell Beckham, and you've got Eli Manning. That is going to be a really formidable looking offense. So that has to be tempting for New York. And you've also just traded Jason Pierre-Paul and you've created a hole at defensive end. So they might also think that someone like Bradley Chubb, for example, would be a really good option for them as well. So they don't have to go quarterback. I've seen mixed things about that. I think Mike Silver was saying during the free agency frenzy program on the NFL Network that they think quarterback might be the most likely thing for New York there. Other people like Jason LaCanfora are saying it won't be a quarterback. That it's going to be either Saquon or Chubb. So in this mock draft, going with Saquon Barkley, I think he's probably the best player for them if they're not going to take a quarterback there. And they can really put a great offense together. And then whoever they eventually replace Eli Manning with, if he's inheriting an offense that's got Odell, that has got Ingram, that has got an offensive line, that has got Saquon Barkley, it'll make life easy for them as well. And I suspect the Jets moved up to number 3, perhaps knowing it would only be one quarterback off the board by their pick, thinking that maybe Darnold's going to go number 1 and New York's going to go in a different direction. And then they can end up taking one of Josh Allen or Josh Rosen or Baker Mayfield once Darnold has gone off the board. I think I'm going to lean towards Josh Allen at this point and think that's possibly what they're going to do. But there's lots of options there for the New York Jets having moved up. And if that is the way that it plays out, if it went Darnold 1, Barkley 2, and then Allen 3 or Rosen 3, that would leave Cleveland's second first-round pick at number 4 as the value pick in the draft. Would Indianapolis in that position there think, hey, we need to move up from number 6 to number 4 to secure Bradley Chubb? A Buffalo are going to trade up for a quarterback from number 12. You know, having collected all these picks, you've still got to imagine that they're going to try and do that. I mean, why else were they collecting all of these picks? To move up and get a quarterback. What about Denver? What are they going to do at number 5? If there's other teams trying to trade into number 4, do they trade up one spot and say to Cleveland, let us have the opportunity to draft our quarterback? You can get the guy that you really want anyway because you've already taken a quarterback. You know, is that something that they're going to think about there too? So the Browns could potentially get a bounty here at number 4 to trade down a little bit, to add to what they already have, which is a huge haul of picks with, I think, is it 3 second-round picks? They could even add on to that. They could maybe add another first-rounder in there. You know, in this mock draft, I've got them collecting Buffalo's number 22 overall pick as well. And I've got them moving down to 12 where they can take a left tackle because they need one now, with Joe Thomas having retired. And if Buffalo really are determined to go up and get one of those quarterbacks, if they wanted to get Josh Rosen here or Baker Mayfield, for example, then that might be a move that suits all teams. So, bit of a thought there on what happened early in the draft. You know, it's a regular theme in some of my mock drafts. For example, I'm pretty convinced that Vita Vea is going to go in the top 10. Pretty sure about that. I think Minkah Fitzpatrick's a little bit overrated. You see him in so many mocks being touted as the number 4 overall pick, or certainly in that top 10. I don't see the appeal. I mean, there are certainly some things to like about Minkah Fitzpatrick, but is he a better safety than Keanu Neal, for example, who went 17 overall? I don't think so. Is he better than Earl Thomas was coming out? No, he was 14 overall. Is he even better than Ha Clinton Dix, who was also at Alabama? Not convinced by that. Was he 21, number 21 overall? And Minkah Fitzpatrick's going to go in the top 5? I just don't see it. Not as an athlete, not as a football player. You know, where a team's going to play him? Is he a cornerback? Is he a safety? I think he's probably a pure free safety, but people seem to convince themselves that he could play cornerback as well. I'm not sure that he's going to go as early as some people think. And the other person that I think is going to be in that position is Roquan Smith at Georgia. And if you want to know why, I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time now. Some Redskins fans who seem pretty determined that he was going to land with their team were giving me some interesting responses to one of my earlier mock drafts, saying there was no way that he was going to fall down to Dallas at number 19 and suggesting that was obviously a Cowboys fan because of that. If you want to know some of the reasons why I've got Roquan Smith falling a little bit, I've got him at 17 here, and I think he could go later than that. Go onto YouTube and search for a guy called Brett Coleman, who does these really detailed, fantastic videos on the top draft prospects. Has done a video today or yesterday on Roquan Smith about some of the issues there that show how much of a trouble he's going to have playing inside linebacker at the next level, in that he just doesn't have the size, he doesn't have the power, he doesn't have the length in the running game. That teams specifically targeted him in the running game and had an awful lot of success against him because they just couldn't get guys off the frame. He can't hold the point. He can't work down the line while engaging in an offensive lineman or even a tight end or somebody like that. He has to play in space. So if you're a 3-4 team, it's not going to work. If you are prepared to take him and try and keep him clean and play him at outside linebacker, then he can rack up the tackles and he can make a number of plays for you. But you have to be, it's all going to be based on scheme and the willingness to have a linebacker like that in your team. Now, there's going to be teams who'll be willing to do that with the way that some of these teams, like the Chargers as well, I've got him going. They're a classic example of a team that could play him at the will and could make the most out of him. If the Seahawks didn't have KJ Wright and wanted to fill that hole as a priority, that would be another option for them as well. And any of these teams that have got great defensive lines that can maybe keep him clean, LA Rams, for example, having traded Alex Ogletree, could be another option, but he's going to be very, very scheme specific. So don't be surprised if Roquan Smith goes a little bit later than some people are talking about here. So the mock draft's on there now. You can go on it. It's 2 rounds. Have a look at that. I want to move on and talk about the Seahawks, though. I have to admit, doing mock drafts at the moment for the Seahawks isn't that much fun. And that's because we know the Seahawks have a lot of needs. We know they currently pick once at 18 and then not again until pick number 120. It's too big a gap. That's 100 picks, pretty much 102 picks, isn't it, before their first two picks currently in the draft. And they're not going to wait that long. We know they're not going to wait 100 picks to pick again. So they're going to move down as things stand. But how do you properly project that into a mock draft? Not only how far they're going to drop, but what they're going to get in return. You don't want to go over the top and give them this huge bounty of picks in the mock draft because it'll be deemed unrealistic. You'll feel a bit guilty doing that because it's probably going to be unrealistic. And yet it would also be more fun to do that, to have them collect, first, third round pick or something like that. Get extra picks to stock up and you hope that that's going to be possible, but it just doesn't seem that likely. Do you trade down multiple times? It's a tough one to get into. But equally, giving them someone at 18 and saying, I'm not going to do mock trades in the mock just seems pointless. They're not going to stick at number 18 and then wait till 120. The value isn't there at number 18. Who are they going to take in that spot that makes them feel comfortable enough to wait a whole 2 or 3 rounds before they pick again? I think you can only really have the debate about who they're going to pick at number 18 if they trade Earl Thomas. And that brings us on to this topic, which I want to touch on briefly. And we're all kind of sat here waiting for that inevitable move that Earl Thomas has been traded, and it just doesn't come. Another day goes by and it hasn't happened. And then you start to wonder, is it ever going to happen? And isn't it just a bit frustrating that it's come to this with one of the all-time great Seahawks players? A big, long waiting game to find out when Earl Thomas is going to be traded. I mean, at the moment, he's just across the Irish Sea from where I am in Yorkshire. He's in Dublin talking about not knowing whether he's going to be staying in Seattle or not on an Irish sports show. How surreal is that? It's very Seahawky, by the way. Earl Thomas is in Dublin currently doing that and talking about his future while we're all sat here waiting to find out what's going to happen on. And the holdup seems to be, just sort of reading between the lines, that teams think the longer this goes on, the price for Earl Thomas to trade for him is going to come down. And the Seahawks are in this awkward position whereby they have to either call the team's bluff and not lower their asking price and their demands and risk not trading him at all, which they seem to want to do, or they bite the bullet and compromise and then face criticism for accepting a lower offer, which they're equally not going to want to do. Because it really does seem pretty clear that they're not going to give Earl Thomas an extension. They're not going to give him a contract extension. It's as clear as their decision to cut Richard Sherman it was. They're going to trade Michael Bennett to allow Sheldon Richardson to depart for about $8 million is what he's going to get in Minnesota, plus a few add-ons. And the decision not to pursue Ndamukong Suh. It just follows on from everything they've done so far, which is to try and turn, if they can save $10 million with Sherman, we'll turn that into 4 players instead of 1. If we can save money on Sheldon Richardson, we'll sign a defensive tackle replacement who's $2 million instead, and then bring in a pass rusher with Marcus Smith. This seems to be what they're doing to fill out the roster, to create competition, to not have some of these big, rich, expensive names anymore. And that means Earl Thomas, they're not going to pay him. They're not going to pay him that third contract, the way it seems to be. And teams probably know this, and they know the longer that this goes on, the more pressure is on Seattle to do a deal. And then the Seahawks, if they don't accept a trade offer, they have to run the risk of Earl Thomas holding out. And do they want that situation? I mean, do you want, at the exact moment that you want to change the culture and get back to being all in, and that's Earl Thomas's card to play, that you're going to do that, and then he's going to say, well, I'm going to hold out. And then you're in a difficult situation. That forces Seattle's hand. That's his card to play. If he's unhappy and doesn't like the fact Seattle have dangled him via trade, but then won't pay him and won't deal him, he can use that holdout to threaten the team to try and force a trade and move this along as well. So it's not a nice situation, unfortunately. It could get ugly before a conclusion happens here. And I think the sooner that we know what's happening and what the conclusion is going to be, either that Earl Thomas is staying or he is leaving, I think the fans will appreciate that, and we can all kind of move on a little bit. In terms of the Seahawks in this mock draft, I've had them trading down with New England. The reason for that is New England have got 2 second-round picks. They've got a bit of some stock to play with there. They need a left tackle, having lost Nate Solder to the New York Giants, and Colton Miller's a bit like Nate Solder. So I've got them moving up to go and get the tackle because I don't think they're going to be able to wait till 31 and get Colton Miller. And then with the Seahawks going running back and defensive end because defensive end options were poor at 31. I've gone with running back first in Ronald Jones the second. I think the running back value is going to be from about pick 30 to about pick 45 or 50. That's when the top ones are going to go. If you don't pick one in that range, then you're going to miss out. So I think it's better to kick off the run than just miss out by waiting until the end of the second round or needing to trade back up into that zone. So Ronald Jones the second, the first pick. People will have seen the tweets from Lance Zierlein yesterday. Lance saying this, now heard from more than one team who's been turned off by how dismissive Ronald Jones has been during their discussions with him, caught both teams way off guard. And it will be as well, because if you watch interviews with Ronald Jones II, he's very engaging, good personality, good character, good interview, does his media work very, very well. So it will have been a surprise to teams if they found him to not be sort of the model interviewee and the kind of person that they had a very good time talking with. So will have been a surprise and will have caught those teams off guard. Now, I'm not going to go into details here. I do know the specifics behind this. I'm not trying to be that guy who says, I know what this is about, but I'm not going to tell you. But I did want to offer a bit of context to this in case people were worrying a little bit about it. It's nothing too bad. It's not a major red flag or anything. You know, teams that are wary about his size, him being 6 foot and 205 pounds instead of 220, 215, the teams that are worried about the size might see it as a reason and another reason to pass on him. And hey, the Seahawks might feel that way too. They might be one of those teams. I mean, they are big on size. They've consistently taken a type of running back, which is about 220, 225 pounds. And if they've got any doubts about Ronald Jones's size, they might be one of the teams that ends up thinking, maybe we should look in a different direction. But the other counter to that is, this is also the team that drafted Malik McDowell, and his personality and attitude is on a different scale completely to Ronald Jones II. They also traded for Percy Harvin and Marshawn Lynch, so I'm not sure that this is anything to fret over too much. If they're willing to make moves for those players, I don't think they're going to be put off by this about Ronald Jones. That's my personal opinion. He's dynamic, he's explosive, he's sudden, he's aggressive, he's physical. He's exactly the type of player that they've targeted early, who is not only a very aggressive, physical, sudden player, but he's just the upside and potential. You know, they've gone for that, whether it's Bruce Irvin, whether it is Bobby Wagner, whether it is Earl Thomas, whether it is Russell Okung. They've looked for sort of unique traits, and Ronald Jones has got that a lot more so than some of the other options that are going to be there in the first round. So happy to go with him. You know, would be a perfect complement to Chris Carson. He's got Jamal Charles potential as a pro, so I was happy to stick with him in the mock draft at 31 there. The second pick was Josh Sweat, and you know, a few thoughts on him. His tape is pretty frustrating. He got this knee brace that maybe held him back. He's had some knee injuries. Maybe he needs to be able to play without that to be his best, but he was slow off the snap too often. He can be a bit laboured working the edge. You know, there's a lot of stuff out there with Josh Sweat that is not particularly exciting. His profile, however, is that of a Seattle edge rusher. The quickness, the length, the explosive traits, the agility. He's a high upside player, ran a 1.5 10-yard split. You know, this is the type of player, again, that they've gone for. And in the late second round, and with the options running thin at defensive end, you know, it's someone you at least have to consider, because his ceiling is so high. And if you want a pass rusher who could be great, then you consider him. If you're worried about the injuries, then you don't, or you look in different directions, but you're not going to get the player with that kind of a ceiling. So that's the kind of balancing act that you've got there. So that's what I'm thinking right now. It's March 23rd, still a long way to go, a month to the draft. I've gone with running back and defensive end. Could have done defensive end and running back if the options are better at 31. They weren't, so I went with running back there. Certainly things can change between now and the draft, especially if Earl Thomas is traded. Significantly so, if Earl Thomas is traded, it's going to change the conversation a little bit. That could bring safety into play, for example. We know that they're going to have a meeting at the VMAC with Justin Reed. But those are my thoughts for now. Want to move on to the Q&A to finish here. Darth Twelver says, let's assume the Seahawks hold on to Earl Thomas. What does the re-signing of Bradley McDougald mean for Delano Hill? Do you see a scenario where all three are on the field together? Well, Pete Carroll didn't seem to be a big fan of the big nickel when he was talking to Brock and Salt during the season. They often had a bit of a laugh about the whole big nickel thing. And they only used it sparingly last season. So I think at the moment it seems like the Earl Thomas situation is, as I mentioned, there is heading a certain way. And if he leaves, then I imagine the early projection would be that it'll either be Bradley McDougald or a draft pick at free safety, and then either Delano Hill or maybe an outside free agent or a rookie comes in to play strong safety, or Delano Hill. They might keep Earl Thomas, which would make this a bit of a moot point. Then it would be Thomas and McDougall. I mean, they did try and trade Richard Sherman a year ago, and they kept him. If they don't get the kind of offer they're looking for, they could just keep Earl Thomas. But I don't see a situation where all three are on the field, and it does seem that if they draft a safety early, or if Earl Thomas stays, it's going to be difficult for Delano Hill. But they want competition, and hopefully he can have a bit more of an impact in year two. Millhouse Serbia says, Rob, KJ Wright is in his contract year, and at this moment we don't have a starting weak side linebacker for 2019. Do you think John Schneider could go linebacker in the first or second round instead of DE, instead of defensive end? Linebacker options are much better than defensive end, and 2019 DE class is extremely strong. Well, the thing about the 2019 draft class is it is strong, but I think it's stronger at defensive tackle than it is defensive end. So you're going to have people like Dexter Lawrence, you're going to have people like Ed Oliver, you're going to have Christian Wilkins who are going to be in there. I mean, there are some defensive end prospects. Austin Bryant also at Clemson's going to be in the next draft. Clelin Ferrell as well from Clemson's bit more. I think he's going to move inside probably the next level and play 3 technique. You've got Nick Bosa, who's going to go very early, and you've got Rashawn Gary from Michigan, who's going to go very early. But, unless the Seahawks are picking in the top 10, how many of those guys are they actually going to be able to get towards? And the other thing you've got to remember is that, yes, they are planning long-term, but they desperately need pass rushers at the moment. And at linebacker, they still have got KJ and they've got Bobby, and they could extend KJ Wright. I mean, I don't think KJ Wright's going to break the bank in a year's time. And he might be the type of veteran, because you never hear anything from KJ Wright. He has been all in from day one, from 2011. You never hear any drama from him. So I just wonder if they might extend him if it all goes well this year, and then still feel pretty comfortable about it. The other thing you've got to remember here is this is a pretty deep class for linebackers, and I wonder if they might look at someone like Leon Jacobs as a potential will linebacker, take him in round 4. Fred Warner's going to be later on. There's people like Matthew Thomas and Oren Burks. There are definitely going to be options for the Seahawks later on at linebacker. So, yeah, there are some great options. If Leighton Vander Esch is there at some point in the first round for them, I'd love them to consider him because I'm a big fan of his. Roquan Smith, who we talked about earlier, could fall a little bit. Maybe at some point the value is just too much there. But I think what's more likely is they take a linebacker later on, and they're going to look at the pass rush options early, because if the pass rush options are after the first two and a bit rounds, they are going to be very, very weak later on. So another question here from DCD2. We all expect to trade down, but is there any player that you could see slipping through that PCJS would simply not pass up at 18? Via, Davenport, Van Der Esch, etc. I know you don't think that some of these guys will, but if they did, who might they take if given the chance? Well, listen, I could see them being very interested in Vita Vea. I could see them being very interested in Van Der Esch and Davenport. But, if I said Vea, we're talking about a top 10 pick, and Davenport's going to go in the top 15, and I think Van Der Esch is going to go in the top 15, but at the very least, he's going to go in the top 20 and may not be there for the Seahawks. So, we might as well throw Bradley Chubb. That's how much I rate Vita Vea. We might as well be asking the question, what if Bradley Chubb was there at 18? Vea's that good. There just aren't many people who are 345 pounds that move like he does, and that have the strength and the ability at the point of attack, and can just sprint from sideline to sideline like he can at 345 pounds. And he's a very, very rare player, and those generally tend to go very, very early. So I'll answer the question and say Vea, but it's just not going to happen. It's just not going to be there at 18. Roland Ice says, Rob, was there anyone else at 63 that made you hesitate and consider instead of Sweats? Looking at the picks for round 2, it's hard to see anybody else to be considered at 63. People like Kimoko Torre, BJ Hill was off the board, Andrew Brown was off the board. Torre was an option there. Potentially, you could have had them trading down and then taking a tight end in round 3. That was an option as well. But yeah, options pretty thin there. So unless you want to sort of start delving into the defensive tackle class, unless you wanted to look at a receiver in that point there, and I don't think they will. I think it was Sweat, it was Torre, it was trading down and looking at Dalton Schultz maybe. That was the kind of the thought process there, or even an Ian Thomas. But I went with Josh Sweat for this particular mock draft. Kenny says, what has been the most draft-informing free agent addition to the team thus far? Balkevius Mingo and DJ Fluker come to mind. Yeah, I think that Mingo is important because there's not many Leos in this draft class, not many Sam Leos, and signing him really solved a gap there. But I think Fluker as well is very important because it suggests that maybe they won't go guard early, that they'll wait on that, or even not take a guard and just trust Posick at left guard, Fluker at right guard, and run with that lineup there. So I'd say those were definitely the two most the most key free agent additions so far. He goes on to say, how do you see them addressing day 3 if they end up with a running back and a defensive end in the first 2 rounds? Well, I think linebacker at some point, like Leon Jacobs' potential a lot, ran a 4.4 at 250. Could see them taking someone like Tyquan Lewis, who had a really good pro day performance, to go with what he did at the combine there. Could see them going defensive backs, Natrell Jameson, Nick Nelson, Trey Flowers, people like that. Could see them taking another running back as well. I could really see them double dipping on running backs in this draft class just because of the depth of quality that is there. So could see that as an option as well there, Kenny. I think he's got another part to his question as well. He says, another question inspired by Lamar Jackson to Arizona. Who do you least wish to see join the NFC West rivals from this draft class? I think I would least like to see probably Tremaine Edmonds going to San Francisco, just because I think that would really solidify them at linebacker, and he's such a good player. Plus, it's one of those where it was tough to watch Hassan Reddick all the way through the draft season last year and then see him go to Arizona. I don't think he had the most impactful rookie season, which was a bit of a surprise. But having seen him and targeted him for the Seahawks early in that process, seeing him go to Arizona was tough. So seeing another guy like that with Edmonds as well go there would be difficult. I'd be really disappointed if Ronald Jones II ended up at one of these teams as well. I just think he's got a bit of a spark there and wouldn't want to see him for the Rams or somebody like that. With Todd Gurley, don't think that's particularly likely, but that as well. And I guess the interior lineman, if the Rams are going to have possibly Sue and Donald and Brockers, if they're also going to have Isaiah Wynn at guard or Austin Corbett or Will Hernandez, probably wouldn't enjoy seeing that too much on the other side of the ball either. So that's how I would answer that one. Trevor says, if the Hawks don't re-sign Maxwell, there seems to be a hole opposite Griffin unless someone like Elliott can step up. Are there any guys from round 4 onwards who you could see come in and compete for a starting spot like Griffin last year? Still think they will sign Maxey, but curious. It's not a good cornerback class. I'd be a little bit worried about that, Trevor. I mean, there are people like Brandon Verkeisen, Isaac Yiadom, who fit them a little bit. Levi Wallace had a good combine. Not quite sure that he's an immediate starter, though. Whether or not they could sprinkle a bit of magic on somebody like Trey Flowers, get him ready. I love Nick Nelson. I think he's the best cover corner in this draft class, but he's got the short arms, and he would be a major exception for them to take him. They'd probably have to take him in round 3 and 4 as well. So can't really see him being an early pick for them unless they wanted a competition at slot corner. But he'd probably be the best cover corner and the guy with the most chance to do it, but not a Seahawks type corner because he's short and he's got short arms. Question number 2 from Trevor: with the current defensive tackle rotation of Jones, Reed, Johnson, and Jefferson, what type of defensive tackle do you think they look for in the draft? A big run stuffer like Settle, for example, or a 3-technique penetrating guy like Andrew Brown. You've mentioned BJ Hill. Do you view him as the best fit? I think he'd be an awesome fit for the Seahawks. He's just big, he's aggressive. I think he's got a huge future in the NFL. Reminds me so much of these Alabama defensive linemen that was just bigger and stronger than everybody else, just a man amongst boys. So I would think BJ Hill would be perfect. I think he's got pass rush potential there, but he's just so stout at the middle. I'd love to see them consider people like, I'm a big fan of Tim Settle. We'll be happy with that. Derek Nardi as well, who could block inside and be a bit of a Mebane type. Would happily have another pass rusher in there as well. And there are some good defensive tackle options in this draft class. So, I could see a 3, a 1, inside-out rusher who can be like Bennett as well. I could see all of those being on the table. And final question, he says, is there a big wide receiver like Tate or Jaleel Scott you could see this Hawks bringing in to replace Graham as a red zone target? I personally think that is why they were interested in Pryor. I mean, I suppose so, but the thing is the Seahawks have never drafted big, slow wide receivers, and that is what we're talking about here, particularly with Auden Tate. So I just wonder if they'll look at the bigger targets that have got some speed, whether that's Marcus Valdez-Scantling, whether that's Equanimous St. Brown, people like that I could imagine them maybe having a look at because they've got the 4.4 speed and the size, which is what they've gone for. I think they're going to be meeting with Keith Kirkwood, aren't they, from Temple, the wide receiver. He's got size and speed. So they might bring in a big target, but it might not be one of the bigger names. And I think whoever it is will have to have some speed as well. So I'm going to wrap it up for the Google Hangout there. Appreciate you all for listening. Stay tuned. We'll have a few more of these coming up very, very shortly as well. And stay tuned to the blog. Lots more articles coming up over the weekend and into next week as well. Maybe even some news in terms of Earl Thomas. And down the line, we'll be doing some interviews with people. So it won't just be me talking to you on these Google Hangouts. I will put maybe 2 or 3 interviews before the draft. We'll see if we can get on there and talk about this draft class with between now and April. So thanks for listening, and we'll speak again soon.